Hi, I'm Tom Flynn, editor of Free Inquiry, and I'm here in the studios at the Center for Inquiry with Arthur Caplan, the Emanuel and Robert Hart Professor of Bioethics and Director of the Center for Bioethics at the University of Pennsylvania in Philadelphia. Dr. Caplan, great to have you with us today.
Thanks for having me.
We're having a conference on the future of naturalism, at which you're one of the presenters. Now, of course, you're known around the country as a go-to guy, a spokesman on bioethical issues, everything from stem cells to various types of high-tech treatments, issues of euthanasia, what have you. Where does the issue of naturalism fit in with all of that?
Well, I am a naturalist. I think that at the end of the day, you want to ground or root your morals, certainly in the public arena, in some commitment to natural events, to what science can discover, to the way we empirically know about and understand the world. It may be a matter of belief or faith or conscience to hold certain moral views or value views privately, but in the public arena, with so many religious views, so many cultural traditions, I think you have to use a kind of grounding in empirical reality, if you will, attentiveness to the facts, using what we know about the natural world to guide our moral decisions. That's our common base to go to. So I don't see any other way to do ethics in public except by being a naturalist.
Although a lot of advocates would look at that question very differently. And of course, in the public debate, you have any number of people who are coming principally out of their own personal religious tradition, their own beliefs, their own determinations of what should be done, and saying X, Y, Z, most often today we hear it regarding stem cell research, is wrong, this is against God's will, you can't do it. And to the degree that these voices are heeded, a lot of other people, including ourselves, would say that some potentially extremely important research is being impeded. So where do we draw that line?
Well, it seems to me you have to be very careful about tolerating appeals to a particular faith or a particular religious tradition as guiding American public policy. It's one thing to draw upon your tradition and say, you know, in this tradition we see the embryo as a person, or in this tradition we understand that perhaps killing innocent life is always wrong. That's appealing to a tradition, not to certify it or make the argument true. It's just saying there may be some wisdom in this particular historical way of looking at things. I'm fine with that. But if you start saying, we have to do this because the Pope says so, we have to do this because the Koran says so, we must do this because the Orthodox rabbis in my area believe this to be true, well, that's not an appeal to reason or rationality. That's an appeal, if you will, to the supernatural or to faith. And I don't think that's the way to guide medicine or science, or for that matter, all of public policy. You don't know whether or not the reasons that these traditions have come up with are sound or valid. They're asking you to take it as an article of faith. I'm not willing to do that when it comes to something as important as, let's say, embryonic stem cell research. I don't want the fate of the next generation of diabetics or people with Parkinsonism or people who suffer from spinal cord injury to hinge on whether or not a particular holy book from 5,000 years ago got the right answer.
And yet in practice, how do you negotiate that disagreement when you've got people stepping up to the bar and saying, my faith tells me that blastocysts have souls, and therefore you and you and you and you from your other traditions, you can't do what my tradition says is wrong either. Where do you go from there?
That truly is the million-dollar question, but it's one that I have to deal with all the time. You know, in bioethics, and particularly in my role, I spend a lot of time out in media debates, public debates, in front of state legislatures. I'm often there with the rest of the diverse voices of America trying to make an argument about which way we should head. There's much to be said here, but I'll boil it down to a couple of points. First, everybody's got to recognize what the facts are and be in sync with them. So if somebody says, for example, well, you know, every embryo is a person, my argument is to say, well, wait a minute, there are embryos that are miswired, there are embryos that, in fact, we know have genetic flaws that will never allow them to develop So you can't really appeal to the principle that every embryo is a person, knowing that some of them have no ability, no potential, no possibility of becoming a person, don't you? Now, they can insist on the principle if they want, but I think you can get people of goodwill to sort of say, well, you know, maybe we got to modify this. Even though that may be an article of religious faith, it's not squaring with where the science is. I think it's important, too, sometimes in these public debates, not to so much demean or put down the religious grounding or somebody's cultural view of what's right and wrong, but to simply say, here's my argument, here's the logic of it. What you're doing is affirming something. What I'm doing is arguing. If you want to follow somebody's affirmation, God, that'll leave the road open to anything. If you want to ground policy in argument, then let's do argument. And so occasionally you can go to a legislator or a media outlet and say, all he's doing is repeating the idea that the Buddha said this, the Buddha said this, the Buddha said this. Well, I'm at least giving you a kind of set of premises and a conclusion. Which do you really want to favor as the basis of public policy? Third, you have to realize you're not going to win them all. You're in politics. There's a lot of powerful lobbies out there. They get places. Sometimes you're doing battle with religious lobbies. I cross swords with corporate lobbies. They have their agendas about what they want to do. You have to have a thick skin and realize that you take your wins where you get them. I think a commitment to incrementalism is, you know, I see some of these books that have come out beating up religion, some of the things by Hitchens and Dan Dennett and others. I have sympathy for those arguments. I think they're basically right, but I'm not sure they're going to win the day that way. And my attitude is, you get 10 states to fund stem cell research, you get Congress to start moving in the right direction, I can live with that.
Very good. Let me shift gears for a moment. People hear the word naturalism, and they think a lot of things. Obviously, what we mean
I think my
by
father would think of nudism. But
yeah. And obviously, we mean constructing a lifestyle, a life stance that is non-supernaturalist, that deals with the things that we can discover and arrive at some consensus regarding using the tools of science. But a lot of other people would look at see the word nature in the root there, and think of a strong commitment to the environment above all, or a discomfort with technology. Now, in your writing, you've always been pretty comfortable with using technology for human benefit.
I yell about it a lot, but I'm pretty much a proponent of technology. I think there's occasionally a little greed that gets in the way, or somebody may move too fast, but you're right. I'm not an anti-technology person in the least.
And a couple of columns ago in Free Inquiry, you were writing about someone, I think, who wanted to ride his bicycle to the top of a mountain.
Yes.
And you said, that's great, but I'll take a helicopter.
Yes.
The view's the same. Now, some people would look at that and say, Art, you're missing the spiritual aspect. You're missing the experiential aspect. And you're getting to the top in your helicopter.
Yeah.
What does this contribute to the whole question on nature, human nature, technology?
I think that's a great question. I think that, first of all, if you look at our species, we have evolved, by my lights, from a set of historical contingent circumstances to be successful and flourish. We do a lot of reproducing early, and we have a finite lifespan, and that's probably all due to evolution. And we've got certain instincts and behaviors kind of wired into us a bit, again, that helped us get around when we had to hunt and compete against both other human tribes, but more likely against the vicissitudes of nature. None of that makes, however, the way we are the way we ought to be. It just makes it the way we are. So, to me, there is opportunity to think about and jump out of, if you will, our own biological design. I'm interested in nature. I want to know what the limits of nature are. But I think we're still open to have discussions and debates about, do you want to transcend our nature? Do you want to modify your nature? Do you want to use technology to substitute for your nature? I came to Buffalo by airplane. I didn't walk. I don't consider that a violation of human nature because I've got another part of my being. There are brains, there are cultures, there are the abilities to, if you will, create science, create technology. These are human too. We don't have design attributes about them. We may not want to fly overly much if it's going to pollute the planet too much. I understand that. But the notion that you somehow have to live with the basics that evolution gave you is no more appealing to me than those who would argue you have to live the way, as they see it, God intended you to, whether it's the Amish or the Mormons. Or I don't see plans written on ourselves. I see possibilities, not limits.
So human nature is really something that we participate in defining, discovering, developing. It's not handed to us by the great draftsman.
To put it another way, I'm not a Platonist. I think human nature is malleable. I'm much more an Aristotelian, to go back to ancient sources. I think you need to know what your nature is. We should understand it, study it. We're not going to get far if we ignore it, so you need to know it. But if I'm designed to be a philandering killer, that doesn't make it right. It may be part of evolutionary design. But then I have to figure out, what am I going to do to transcend my nature? What am I going to do to rein in my nature? I may even decide in the long run that I'm going to engineer certain things out of my nature. It's dangerous business. That design probably had certain advantages. It's not to be trifled with lightly, but it's not to be fixed in stone. There is no, I don't see us as having essences that way, whether they're souls or templates or Platonic cores. I don't think, everything is up for discussion.
One last item of discussion. What do you see as the future of naturalism? There seems to be a strong rising tide of religion, spirituality, superstition, whatever, however you want to position it across the continuum. And as a naturalist, I sometimes feel like I'm under siege in ways that I wasn't 20 years ago.
Yeah.
What lies ahead?
Well, I think we have a couple of interesting scenarios ahead. Science and medicine are offering us some pretty big rewards in the 21st century, and particularly in America. Americans may seem very religious, but they're also technologically fascinated. Remember, think about how we die. We are religious, and we got people thinking about the hereafter, we got people worrying about the fate of their immortal soul, and they're also at the same time trying to figure out when to shut off the respirator, do I use dialysis, and is it okay to pull a feeding tube? So we have this weird mix. It's not all just pray and go on to the hereafter. As far as I can see, even the most religious are dying in hospitals. They're not, headed out to a UFO landing site or going back home to let the priest minister to them. So there is an area, no matter how religious the society is, in which the science and the technology abut the religious. And those rules and principles are going to have to be worked out. Science and technology are not standing still. They're offering more and more benefits. So I think the lure of that will be apparent both here and elsewhere. I think we're going to face an issue. The world is becoming international, and our religions, as we see with Islam's confrontations with Christianity, with Hinduism's confrontations with Islam, in a world in which transportation, media bring us together, we've got to figure out rules as to how we're going to get along, to quote Rodney King. And I don't see any particular religion having an answer. I think that's where naturalism is going to have to come up with suggestions about how to have peaceful coexistence, how to have cultures that are, in some ways, fundamentally at each other's throats. Other thing I would say about the future of naturalism, we learn more about ourselves. We will come to understand a lot more about the human brain. As we do, it's going to challenge even now our notions of responsibility, personal responsibility, how we punish people. We may move more toward therapeutic models as we see what's going on there, and the ability to forecast who's likely to behave or get involved in certain types of behavior. These are major, major questions. I'm not sure the religious traditions have much to say about them. Secularism and naturalism may be the only places. I've jokingly said there are days in which I think doing the bioethics and sort of watching the cutting edge of technology, it's the thin, thin, thin line. There's not many people out there kind of watching the next stage. If naturalism and secularism can provide that help in thinking, I think that will help their status.
Oh, thank you very much.
My pleasure.
Dr. Arthur Caplan, bioethicist at the Center for Inquiry. I'm Tom Flynn.